Now in the midst of the assembly was the venerable Subhuti. Forthwith he arose, uncovered his right shoulder, knelt upon his right knee, and respectfully raising his hands with palms joined, addressed Buddha thus: World-honoured one, it is most precious how mindful the Tathagata is of all the bodhisattvas, protecting and instructing them so well. World-honoured one, if good men and good women seek complete and perfect enlightenment, by what criteria should they abide, and how should they discipline their thoughts? Buddha said, Subhuti, all the bodhisattva heroes should discipline their thoughts as follows. All living creatures of whatever class, born from eggs, from wombs, from moisture, or by transformation, whether with form or without form, whether in a state of thinking or exempt from thought necessity, or wholly beyond all thought realms, all these are caused by me to attain unbounded liberation nirvana. Yet, when vast uncountable immeasurable numbers of beings have thus been liberated, verily, no being has been liberated. Why is this, Subhuti? It is because no bodhisattva who is a real bodhisattva cherishes the idea of an ego entity, a personality, a being, or a separated individuality. So these two short extracts are from the beginning of the Diamond Sutra, as it is called. And the Diamond Sutra is a very short sutra that belongs to the Prajnaparamita cycle of sutras, the great wisdom gone beyond sutras. Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, for example, is a classic one, and the Heart Sutra, that is the Heart of Great Wisdom Sutra, that is chanted in Zen monasteries, and also often at the end of Zazen, which is a distillation of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, all belong to this same genre, this same family of sutras, and basically the teaching that they are giving is that of emptiness. But the Diamond Sutra itself, curiously, it doesn't actually use the word emptiness or shunyata as it is in the Sanskrit at any point in the text, and concentrates very much on the selflessness or emptiness of self of all beings. The Buddha's original teaching of anatta, from which the teaching of shunyata arose. So the Diamond Sutra itself, sometimes it's called the Diamond Cutter Sutra, and the allusion in the title is to the hardness of the diamond. The diamond itself is very hard to cut, and it itself can cut other things because it is so hard. It doesn't yield. And so this allusion of the diamond is to the Buddha's teachings, the ability of the Buddha's teachings to be able to cut through the bonds of ignorance. And this evokes in us the image of the great bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri, who's often pictured holding a flaming sword aloft, with which he also cuts through the bonds of ignorance of suffering beings in order to liberate them into the realization of Buddha nature. And the just to say, in Zen again, in Zendos, this is represented. That sword that cuts through ignorance is represented by the keisaku, or the wooden stick that's laid across the altar and is used during the periods of Zazen in order to waken up the sitters. It's used usually in a quite formal way. If your shoulders are getting very tight, and particularly in the longer sittings, you can put your hands together as the jikijitsu walks past, and then you can receive the keisaku on the back, between the shoulder blades and the spine. It's used normally 2 or 3 sharp wax are used, first of all, well, it loosens up the muscles on the back, which is usually where a lot of the tightness actually is. But it also causes the blood to pump and flow, and releases a little bit of adrenaline, and you get a bit of an energy rush. So quite often, if the sitters are feeling a bit sleepy, the keisaku is used to invigorate and to bring to focus and clarity the quality of the zazen in the student. And so hence this is called the sword of Manjushri, the keisaku, as it is. So the diamond, as I said, is the illusion here is the ability of this teaching of anatta, of emptiness of self, is there to is alluded to, is the ability of it to cut through those bonds of ignorance. And of course, the concern here is with the bodhisattva path, and the Prajnaparamita sutras outline this bodhisattva path. If we remember that the practices of the bodhisattva are the 6 parameters. The parameter of giving, dana, and of shila, daily life practice. Then there's the patient endurance, and then the devoted energy, meditation practice, and then wisdom practice, prajnaparamita, the wisdom gone beyond, which is the culmination, the apotheosis, if you like, of these. And of course, along with that comes the bodhisattva vow, which is to not enter nirvana solo, but to turn back and be of assistance and service to all beings, so that all will enter nirvana together. And finally, obviously, it's the development of skillful means. This is the other great skill of the bodhisattvas, and particularly the great bodhisattva mahasattvas, which obviously includes the Buddha, which is the skillful means, the ability to be able to use all means available to bring beings to awakening and to liberation. So these are the concerns of all the Prajnaparamita type sutras, and it's what we have here. So a couple of sort of facts, obviously, about the Diamond Sutra itself. Its composition is uncertain. Sometime between the 2nd and the 5th century of the Common Era, it is presumed by the academics now. I think one of the oldest sutras that's actually still in existence is a copy of the Diamond Sutra that we actually have from that period as well. It was originally translated from Sanskrit into Chinese, firstly by Kumarajiva, the great translator, and this sutra has always been very closely associated with the 6th patriarch of Zen, Huineng, or Eino Daiken. So much so that in the English translations you often get the two, the Diamond Sutra and the 6th Patriarch's Platform Sutra often go together, because it was from a verse or hearing a passage of the Diamond Sutra being chanted that Eino Daiken, or Huineng, who would become the 6th Patriarch, first became awakened. So it's very, as I say, very closely associated with him. And now, of course, the Zen school itself doesn't have a particular sutra or scripture associated with it. Many other schools of Buddhism do have certain ones, like Pali Canon or Lotus Sutra, and so on. However, there are certain sutras traditionally that are regarded as very close and very popular in the Zen school, and the Diamond Sutra is certainly one of those, and it is most likely because of that connection with the 6th Patriarch. So, having said that, we now turn to the protagonists here. So, the Diamond Sutra, which is a very short sutra, as I've said, is a sort of question and answer discussion between the Buddha and Subhuti. And Subhuti was one of the 10 great arhats that surrounded and was part of that sort of inner coterie, if you like, of the Buddha, as he appears in the Pali Canon. We're probably a little bit more familiar with arhats such as Shariputra and Moggallana, who often appear flanking the Buddha in many of the frescoes and pictures that show the Buddha preaching. But Subhuti was certainly one of that group, one of the 10 great arhats, and he also appears quite often as well in the Mahayana sutras as well. And obviously here we find him with the Buddha. And it's said that he himself came from quite a wealthy family, a merchant's family. His father and his uncle, his brother and his uncle, I think, were patrons of the Buddha throughout the Buddha's own teaching life, so there was a strong family connection there. And it is said that Subhuti himself came to his own awakening through the practice of metta. Metta is one of the 4 great Brahma Viharas, otherwise known as the divine abodes, and these are the qualities of the liberated heart, the divine qualities of the heart that is now free from the taint of self, and they are metta, which is sometimes translated as loving kindness, but I'm going to use the term goodwill here. Because that's what it is. It's loving kindness has a sort of personal, emotional connotation, but actually goodwill towards all peoples is more what this metta is. It's unbounded. It shines like the sun in all directions. It doesn't discriminate between high and low, or any other differences or opposites at all. So that metta, that goodwill towards all, and this was the practice that that Subhuti awoke to, and he was said to be able to attain to the absorption or the meditative state of metta, and that therefore those who gave to him on his alms round were considered to be particularly blessed. And so his name Subhuti means something like he who is foremost in the giving of gifts to, i.e., if you give gifts to Subhuti, your merit is so great because he is able to shine this meditative state of metta towards you, which is a great gift also in return. The other divine abodes, just to go through them, are karuna, which is compassion, obviously, and then sympathetic joy and serenity or equanimity. So goodwill, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Those are the 4. And of course the attainment of any one to completion is the attainment to all of them. So hence why the practice of one of them to perfection is the attainment of them all. So this is the person who's actually speaking to the Buddha, who asked that question of the Buddha. And of course he's prompted to ask the question that the readers or the hearers of the Diamond Sutra want to know. The Buddha preached the great bodhisattva path, the path to complete and perfect enlightenment. So how do we embark upon that path? How do we conduct ourselves upon that path? And the Buddha gives his answer here. The Buddha said, Subhuti, all the bodhisattva heroes should discipline their thoughts as follows. All living creatures of whatever class, born from eggs, from wombs, from moisture, or by transformation. So this fourfold form of birth, what's known as the 4 modes of birth, it's a classical Buddhist formulation. You get it referred to in Master Rinzai as well. This is how these 4 modes are the 4 modes by which all rebirth or all incarnation or all rebirth, shall we say, can happen. So birth from an egg and from a womb, those 2 things are fairly obvious, but this third one, from moisture, might not be. So from moisture, well, we have to remember Buddhism obviously came from India. India is a very hot country, very hot and dry, but it is interspersed with these very powerful downpours. And so where you get sort of puddles of water that can persist, say, in some kind of shade from that very hot evaporation of the sun caused by the sun, then very quickly, within a day or two, if you look into those pools of water, you'll see all sorts of little wriggling larvae in there. These are obviously the eggs of insects who have laid their eggs in that water, but you don't necessarily see that. What you see is the larva, and it seems to be that the water itself, or it was believed that the water itself, the moisture itself, produced life. Is rather in the same way that moisture in a body can also seems to produce life, such as flies and larvae, as that body decays as well. And something that's very dry or desiccated doesn't do that. So it was believed that moisture itself was a mode of birth. And then the final one is by transformation. And transformation is simply the transforming of one thing into another. So, for example, the acorn into an oak tree, or the caterpillar into a butterfly via the chrysalis, obviously. And so these were the four modes. And what we have here, the importance of these four modes, is that they are examples of what is called dependent origination. Dependent origination, of course, takes us back to the classic wheel of life, because those what's known as the 12-link chain of dependent origination, or sometimes called the 12-link chain of arising due to conditions, appears on the rim of that wheel as 12 pictographs. And basically, without needing to go into the detail of that right now, the principle by which the whole of that wheel of samsara turns, with its 6 realms and its beings going up and down, and the 3 fires which power that wheel at the center of it, the process by which that wheel turns is the karmic principle. And karma is driven by this principle of what's called dependent origination. And that is that all birth is dependent on something else, something preceding it, for it to come into existence. So the classic formula for karma, obviously, is if A arises, B arises. If A does not arise, then B does not arise. But as well as causes from the past, obviously, we have conditions in the present. So, for example, the mammalian body is born from a womb. So the womb is the dependent originator for the mammalian body, such as ourselves. For the chick, it is the egg. The egg is the precursor. The egg is that which upon which the development and the birth of the chick depends. And the wriggling things for the puddle of water, and the oak tree, obviously, it is dependent upon the acorn for its own existence. So, as I say, the important thing here is that there is no such thing as birth from nothing, birth from ex nihilo. This is why there is no first cause. There is no creation story as such in Buddhism. It's always said, so for example, in the Repentance Sutra that's chanted in the temples, it begins by saying, all the evil karma of body, speech and mind, which has accumulated from beginningless time. There we have it, that beginningless time. There's no point at which it has started. It's just forever going backwards. This is that dependent origination. One thing is always dependent upon another to come into existence. So these four modes are demonstrating that, and what we have here, of course, is is something that we shouldn't just take as being, as it were, physical birth. This is also referring to different types of birth in the mental realm, in consciousness too. The illusion here is not only is physical birth subject to dependent origination, but also mental states themselves, states of consciousness, those 6 states on the wheel, for example, which we've talked as being states of consciousness, the fighting demons, the hungry ghosts, the god realms, miserable beings, animal realms, and then the human realm. They're all 6 states of consciousness with which our flow of conscious elements, what's called the Dharma Santana, is constantly evolving. And how does that evolution take place? Well, it takes place through through karmic processes. And what is a karma? Well, karma is or karmic energy, karmic power, is produced by intentional acts of body, speech, and mind. So the body acts, the speech is spoken, and thoughts are thought. The thinking process itself, the way that thinking takes place, with intention, any of these things that are made with intention, they give birth. They prime, they produce potency, produce what's called a seed or a bija, and then they give birth to something in time. And so what we have here is also coupled with this notion that like gives birth to like. An angry thought can give birth to angry speech and angry action and further angry thoughts. So like produces like. What we have is like a coalition of like selves, we could say, angry selves or hungry selves or godlike selves and so forth, that bob up and down in this ever ongoing sea of consciousness. And these are the six realms that we have. So karma is very is used as the explanation for habit formation, and habit formation, is that which over time produces what we would know as personality traits as well. And of course, people inherit personality traits as well. So the personality traits, or the habit formations that are karmically driven, although they may appear to belong to a discrete being, such as an oak tree, such as a cat, such as a human being, actually these formations, because they are in existence, that they are inherited, as well as compounded upon in the present moment, they don't belong to anybody. They themselves are beings. And this is why, when you look on the wheel of life, and this is why the wheel of life can be used as an object of meditation, for insight meditation, you see that those six realms are full of beings, according to that realm. So the hungry ghost realm is full of hungry ghosts, and the god realm is full of deities and devas, and the animal realms with animals, and so on and so forth. And their environment reflects their nature as well. This is the other thing, because as far as karma is concerned, seeds don't just ripen into the present willy-nilly. They ripen because of circumstances, if you like, because of environmental circumstances that are around us now, and they're being primed by those conditions around us. Those conditions around us, if you like, they evoke selves in a sort of in a lineage, in a process of lineage, and that self then acts with intention and produces seeds of further rebirths down the line when it meets the right conditions for that self to emerge and be born once more. So we are now losing this notion, or we should be sort of losing this notion of my karma, this is my karma or whatever, and see that in fact we are subject to ripening seeds and our environmental conditions that produce certain temporary appearances of selves to bob up and down into this stream of consciousness. And this is the habit formation that we have. And of course, perhaps the best analogy that I like anyway is that of the garden, because we plant seeds, and seeds germinate and they produce fruit. And the thing about a garden is that you can either just leave it be and let circumstances rule it, and this would represent the person who really is very unreflective, just simply lives an impulsive life. Whatever's blown or into the garden or dropped into the garden takes root or doesn't, depending on the quality of the soil, of course. Not all seeds will germinate because not all environments are conducive to the germination and fruiting of that seed. So some things don't touch us, other things do. Good example of that, obviously. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably interested in Buddhism. You're not just, it's unlikely that you're listening to this purely randomly when you could be listening to something else that a self that is seeded in your own conscious stream would be more attracted to. For example, there will be other peoples who would see something like the Zen Gateway or see this podcast and would just go swipe right, I think it's called, is it? Absolutely no interest whatsoever. So even though these seeds, what comes in through the sense gates, if you like, are coming in all the time, depending on the depending on the ground of the heart in that moment, some seeds will germinate, some seeds will catch our attention, and others will not. And this is the karmic process. This is the karmic process that's going on all the time. And in our practice, if we've developed a strong enough meditation muscle or meditation strength, as our Zen strength, that we are present in the body and we're not being carried off by those emerging seeds, and yet we do not suppress those emerging seeds, in fact actually we can't, without becoming entangled in them again, then we can actually witness this flow of seeds and elements and fruition and intention and so forth. We can actually see these modes and modalities of the realms as they appear and as they disappear. And we are encouraged to do this by our practice. And the interesting thing, of course, because I'm using the term selves here, and you may be sort of thinking, well, the Buddha said no self, and that's a very good point. We need to clarify this, because it's certainly true that the appearance of a self comes in, and this is although the Buddha said this is an appearance, it has no basis in reality. And what the Buddha meant by this is that because it is dependent on something else for its existence, as we said, seeds and conditions, it cannot be said to be self-generating, self-sustaining, and self-producing. That would sort of like wrap it up and make it discrete from all those causes and conditions we've just been talking about. It would make it separate and discrete. And it would also, if it is self-generating, mean that it could continue on under its own steam for, without any reference to any cause and condition outside of it. And the Buddha said that is not how the world works. That's why the self is a delusion. However, the delusion itself is real, and that's so. So when we have a thought, such as, for example, if I look out of the window and I've just hung the washing out, and I look and I see the washing blowing, and then I see storm clouds rolling in, and the first drops of rain appear on the window pane, and that condition in the present, produces an emotional reaction. Because that emotional reaction comes from the fact that my hard work, which is to dry the washing, my lovely clean laundry, is going to be thwarted. Because it's going to get wet again. And so what that does, that I think, oh my goodness, it's going to rain. Now it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a thought, oh my goodness, it's going to rain. This is part of that inner narrative that we have all the time. But the question is, who am I talking to when that thought is said? In fact, let's take the I out of that. Let's just stick with the thought. Who is the thought referring to? Because If someone else was in the room and I turned to them and said, "Oh my goodness, it's going to rain. We'd better go and get the washing in," then that thought would give birth to a self that then takes action, would physically get up, go out, collect the washing and bring it in. Yeah. So we have this flow. Okay, we have the desire to do the laundry. I've hung the laundry out to dry. That was the intention. The clouds then roll in. This is the condition in the present, and that produces, that environmental situation produces a self. So in fact, a self which then says, this self now being a thought, "Oh my goodness, it's going to rain. I better get the laundry in," which then in turn gives birth to a being, a physical being that gets up and goes out and takes the washing in. So we have a whole series of births that are happening, and it seems to be that this is all mediated by using the thought, using the language that we do. And the interesting thing, again, this shows that there is no self, because again, come back to our question, who is that thought directed at? That thought of better get the washing in before it rains is directed to the self in the future that's just about to emerge in the physical body to get up and go out and collect the washing in. So we might say, well, I'm talking to myself, but that's not quite right, actually, because the I in the thought is not the same as the physical being that gets up and goes and collects the washing in. So what we have is this stream of rebirth, this stream of selves that are arising and passing away. So the thought arises, it is spoken either out loud or in the mental ear, and then it disappears, and that immediately then produces the next self, which physically goes up and gets the washing in. So you might think, why are we going into such detail with this? Because it is by seeing this detail that we can see this progression of selves, and that breaks down this notion of myself, of I, and instead what we see is what has always been there, is the mechanism by which consciousness develops and evolves. And so in a way, in fact, what we're moving from is this notion of truth, away from the delusion of a discrete myself to a lineage of selves. We've now moved on to the links of the 12-fold chain itself, if you like. And this lineage of selves goes past, comes out from the past into the present, and then it's projected forward into the future. So even in this moment, whatever age we are, whatever day of the week it is, right now, in this moment, this is the active point of the lineage of selves that has been in existence since beginningless time. Because clearly, if we rewind it all back to our own birth, it doesn't start there, does it? Because, as we've already said, we inherit traits as well. We physically come from obviously our parents, and as we are conscious beings, that consciousness is also part and parcel of what we are inheriting too, and we know that true from scientific research. Babies are not born as tabula rasa or blank sheets. Babies are born in, and they carry with them the inherited traits as well. And it's and this is part of evolution. Even Darwinian evolution, if you like, could be considered as a sort of stream of selves that are carrying information from the past into the present. This information is what the form of the habit in the present will actually take. So take, for example, the anteater. The anteater has a long nose and a long tongue that is designed to collect ants. It's designed so that it can stick its nose into an ant's nest down the tunnels and then stick its tongue out, its sticky tongue, and collect ants. It's that nose itself is a product of all those ant hills that have gone from time immemorial. And it's the same with our bodies, and it's the same with our personalities, and it's the same with all the traits and skills that we have. That actually, when we look at them, they are dependent upon environments past and present that have shaped them and produced them and brought them into existence. And if we look at that, then it becomes very difficult to say where the self begins and where it ends. Because, the anteater's nose is a product of anthills. It's a conversation between a body, a physical tissue body, and an anthill. And by extension, the ants themselves who made that hill. So we can see that this really begins to, as it were, nest these different conceptions of what is a self, one inside another, first. And it reminds us of that story of the king and queen who lived at the time of the Buddha and ruled over a land, over a small kingdom, and they loved their people. And one evening they were looking out from their palace and they saw smoke coming out of the chimneys of all the houses in the city, and the king turned to the queen and said, "I'm so happy because the smoke rising means that everybody has something to eat, and I love my people, and I love you, my dear, and I love our children." And then he sort of froze for a moment, and he said, "Oh my God." And she said, "What is it? What is it, my husband?" And he said, "I've realized, whilst it's true I love my people and you and the children, if I'm really honest, I love myself most of all." And the queen was shocked because she thought he loved her most of all. And then she reflected and said, "My goodness, my husband, you're right. I too love myself more than I do you and everybody else." And they were disturbed by this, so they went to see the Buddha. And the Buddha said to them, he said, "Well, it's perfectly natural to love oneself first, and in fact it's necessary. If we don't develop that relationship properly, then it becomes very difficult to truly love others as well. The mistake is if we just stop at self-love. That circle has to be expanded and expanded and expanded to take in everything. And this is, of course, this results in the bodhisattva ideal, of course, which is to be of benefit and the metta and compassion to all sentient beings, etc. So here we here we have that real pointing towards this fluidity, this emptiness, if you like, of self-nature, which is, of course, the realization of anatta. So we go on. So the Buddha was saying, all living creatures of whatever class, born from eggs, from wombs, from moisture, or by transformation, whether with form or without form. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been discussing forms and without forms. We think of all selves or all beings as having a form, but actually a lineage of selves is therefore also a being. It's an immaterial thing in a way, because it's made up of a lineage itself is obviously made up of all the things from the past that now come into the present. But in the present, those things from the past, those beings from the past, those physical beings from the past, of course, have passed out of existence. And yet the power of the lineage remains. The lineage has agency in the same way that we would give ourselves agency. In fact, according to this, the agency belongs to the lineage, to the karmic lineage, because that's what acts through body, speech and mind. And it's this that we're coming into contact with. And what's more, these lineages entangle and they entwine with one another by what we come into contact with. And this can work for good and for ill, for example. So, for example, on the good, this is why we come into contact with the Buddha Dharma. because the Buddha Dharma itself has a lineage. Obviously, it goes, it incorporates all those who have been involved in the production, the practice, and the dissemination of the Buddha Dharma. And when we pick up a book of the Dharma, or when we listen to a talk of the Dharma, then our own lineage and the lineage of the Buddha becomes entangled. And if the affinities between the two are there, that is, that there's a chemistry between those two, which we referred to earlier, then they produce something. That entanglement then itself has agency, because it begins to direct the life. It begins to direct the flow of conscious elements going into the future, which will also disseminate out as well. But the same can also happen when it comes to, for example, the kleshas, the passions, as they're called, the three fires that exist at the beginning of that wheel. If we are constantly indulging them and reinforcing them, if we have an affinity to certain passions, which we do, then we become entangled with those as well, and that too then flows onward into future selves, into the future. Again, we come back to the anteater's nose. The anteater's nose, the lineage of the anteater's nose, and the lineage of the ants' nests have become entangled, and they have produced an effect. The anteater's nose grew longer over time as it began to adapt. And that's what habits do. That habits adapt us to the circumstances. And of course, the reason that we come to the Buddha Dharma is that the Buddha Dharma itself is an adaptation. It says, if you're in the position of living an impulsive life, you're probably maladapted. Well, you will be maladapted to your circumstances, because you will act out of the false notion of a self, and because that goes against the true nature of things, you will always be at odds with life, and you will suffer as a result of that. The Buddha Dharma helps us recognize the true nature and to operate and act in accord with it. So entangling us, it matters what we entangle ourselves with. And in that way, what that then develops, and that then conditions the future rebirths, the future incarnations that are going to be coming along. And that's what is meant by being of service to all beings. We through our actions of body, speech, and mind in the present, are having an impact. We are serving or providing a disservice to those future incarnations, those future beings. It doesn't just, of course, stay with one. So that we have our three kinds of agency, those immaterial selves, if you like, those beings without form, things like lineage, etc., operate through those three doors of body, speech, and mind. So whether in a state of thinking or exempt from thinking, or exempt from thought necessity, or wholly beyond all thought realms, all these are caused by me to attain unbounded liberation nirvana. So that is the intention, that's the right intention, if you like, that the bodhisattva, or the bodhisattva hero, bodhisattva mahasattva, gives rise to. Because the bodhisattva exists in the world of appearances, exists in the world of phenomena, and has to, because the bodhisattva is there to liberate phenomenal beings in whatever form they may take, whether physical or non-physical. And therefore, that intention holds true. Because we may sort of say, well, how does it hold true? Because then the Buddha goes on to say, yet when vast, uncountable, immeasurable numbers of beings have thus been liberated, verily no being has been liberated. Why is this, Subhuti? It is because no bodhisattva who is a real bodhisattva cherishes the idea of an ego entity, a personality, a being, or a separated individuality. And this is Therefore, this is therefore um, uh, uh, takes us back, of course, to that classic teaching of Buddhism that makes sense when we read this sort of apparent contradiction, that the doctrine of the two truths, that there's a relative truth that pertains to the phenomenal world, and then there's an absolute truth that is gone beyond. It's not that it's gone to another place, there is no other place, but that the dimension that is normally cut out by the phenomenal world to the true nature of things, when that dimension is fully realized, there are no beings there. But then there are no bodhisattvas and Buddhas there either. And this is why in the Heart Sutra it goes through form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is no different from emptiness, emptiness is no different from form, and then it goes on, and there's no five skandhas, and there's no eye, and no nose, and no tactile sensations, and no hearing. There's no attainment, there's no liberation from suffering, there's no way to the liberation of suffering, and it goes all the way through. And then you get the great mantra of the Heart Sutra, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone altogether beyond, over to the other shore, awakening supreme, which just neatly wipes that whole thing out. And yet the bodhisattva returns to the phenomenal world where there are beings to be liberated. So, please to remember that there is the truth of the phenomenal world, and there's the truth, the absolute truth as well. And the other thing to remember is that these two truths are one. The relative truth is the absolute truth as well as being, and the absolute truth has the relative truth, or is expressed in and through the relative truth as well. So what that means is that all things, all beings themselves express the whole of the truth, as well as being itself, and functioning differently from every other being. It also is everything itself. And this, of course, takes us to that classic Huayan of Indra's net, where the single jewel reflects all the other jewels as well as itself. Okay, there's a lot that we could go into further here, but I think spoken for enough for now. We will no doubt come back to other selections from the scriptures in due course. Thank you very much, but for now we'll leave it there.